Hello, hello, hello. Test, 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 test.
What does this do stuff called again? Is this Teams?
This is Zoom,
Zoom.
which
I
will
saw that.
eventually be integrated into
I wanted to
Teams.
look at it.
Look how much clearer this is already.
Yeah. And will it show the additional places?
I don't know if it's dialed in yet or not.
Yeah, but I mean, it'll show whoever's dialed in, I assume.
I think so.
That's gonna be interesting to see.
'Cause I thought
Who's that
ideally-
top room? The live, is that Montana Wild or something?
I don't know. 'Cause I thought they were gonna make this one the focus. And, oh, that must be Billings.
Billings, oh, maybe Billings, yeah. And then we're down in the corner, I see me, and then surrounded by me is Region 2. That's Region 2. This one here, I think
that's
4. I think it's 4.
I still have the old school TV card.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know who that is standing up over there. Public? Why would a public person be in there already? I don't know who that is. Anyway, that looks very clear.
That's better, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Interested. All right. I'll pop back in later. See how it looks.
Hello, Sonny. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us or me?
Yep. Yep. Thank you very
Cool.
much.
All right, cool.
Test, test, test. Thank you, thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Come back to Helena.
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. With the end of the hunting season and the holidays, a lot of distractions, but I spent a lot of time working with folks on Madison and hearing a lot of comment on both wolves and elk shoulder seasons that we'll spend the afternoon talking about. But I'm glad the new year's afoot and looking forward to the work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I had a joyous end of hunting season and a lot of experiences with family. A number of meetings, and one thing that I've attended, I did attend a CAC meeting in Region 2. Very interesting discussion about parks and also about wolves. So that was a really good meeting. I also just participated in Kalispell season setting meeting for people in the Kalispell area, and that was a very interesting meeting, and it started participated in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to wish everybody a happy new year. The other night I did go up to Whitlash for a landowner meeting, sportsman meeting on CWD and changing the 3 to the 5-week season. A lot of opposition in that area to go to a 5-week season. Along the same lines, I did get a letter, and I think the rest of the commissioners did, from the Liberty County commissioners that do not want to see us go from a 3 to a 5 because of the additional damage to the roads. But along those same lines, I was asked to attend a road meeting in Hill County Electric, or Hill County, and they would like to see us go to a 5-week season over in Liberty County because they're saying the last 2 weeks their roads are getting tore up by all the people that are coming out of Liberty County. But the other thing at the Hill County road meeting, they're going to be getting a hold of FWP to see if there's a way they can get some help up by the Lost River Ranch. There's about 8 miles of road there that's not graveled. And with these late storms this last year, they're tore up so bad that those farmers and ranchers say they cannot get their grain out because they will not take their trucks over the way the roads are at this time. So we'll probably be hearing some more on that to see if there's some way we can help them. They also, and I did report this to Mark Sullivan, the Region 6 manager, some of them are wondering, up there's about 100 head of elk on the Lost River Ranch. They go into Canada, if there's maybe a way to look at permitting rather than a general season up there so that only the ones with permits will show up. One guy estimated they're getting over 1,000 vehicles up there looking for those 100 head of elk, and that's what's causing a lot of the problem on the road. So like I say, I did pass that on to Mark Sullivan and Scott Thompson to look at to see if there is something that they think might or might not work moving forward. I also attended the Devil's Kitchen meeting working group before Christmas. They had a very good turnout, and I think all of the commissioners received a letter from that group with their desires for the season setting. I also spent a pleasurable 3-hour drive over around the Lewistown area, and I'm probably going to screw this name up, Doug Kearns, where we drove around through 411 and some of those and looked at the different areas. And then I stopped over and saw Sonia Anderson, the biologist in that area. Also, I've received a lot of different letters from individuals, as the rest have, in regards to the season setting. But also we have one that I hope the department is looking into, and that came from the Wild Sheep Foundation and the wool growers in regards to the Bridger Mountains, seeing if we could transplant some sheep into that area again. And with that, turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Brower.
Not much other than I apologize I couldn't make it back to Helena. I just got back to Scobie Saturday. So, like everyone else says, I wish everybody a Happy New Year, Happy Holidays. Hope it went well. Numerous calls regarding season setting, but just kind of save it basically for shoulder season discussions. So, other than that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here today. We typically don't have a meeting in January. We've done this before though, when we were looking at season setting and realized that our final agenda is going to be, full, and that there's an item of particular interest in which season setting, and especially in the setting of shoulder seasons, always draws a lot of interest. So it's nice that we can address some of these items here today, and have a work session. And I'm looking forward to the dialogue that we generate there. I've been in touch with the Devil's Kitchen working group as well, and have had a good conversation with them. And I'm glad that the level of engagement that we're seeing in the meeting that you attended was really well attended, and the thoughtful comment and discussion that flowed after that. So they may not be, but I'm pleased that exercise took place. And I think many members of that group are pleased as well that they could have an open discussion and know that the commission is listening to them and hearing what they're saying and giving it careful consideration. And I'll save the rest of my comments because, of course, I've been receiving much unending phone calls on season setting, and that's probably be the case here until February. So, Director Williams.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, Happy New Year to everybody. The department's December, I would say, was quite and I was lucky enough to travel to different regional meetings, and then there was a fisheries division meeting. The fisheries division was able to have a division meeting in 4 years, was it? And a long time. So we've been busy with not only season setting, but also with grizzly bears, with parks, with a whole number of issues. So for the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead with our first item. We're leading off with fisheries and the Kookanusa bull trout harvest closure.
Morning and Happy New Year. Just quickly before I go into our one item, just to give you all a quick update on the Madison survey. You'll probably all remember that scoping survey closes today. As of this morning, we were over 7,000 surveys. 80% of those are fully completed. We've had 90% of our SRP holders complete the survey, which we're pretty pleased with. And we've got over 200 email comments. As of this morning, survey results are rolling in at 2 a minute right now. So we're expecting by the end of today to have quite a few surveys to start processing. So we've got the results of that to look forward to. So the fisheries item for today is the Kookanusa bull trout harvest closure. This should be a pretty quick item. And we use red counts in the fall to give us an idea of how those populations are doing. Currently on Lake Kookanusa, we do allow harvest under the permission of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. 1 bull trout per license per year is allowed. The results from the red counts from last fall in 2019 in both British Columbia on Wigwam River and Grave Creek in Montana, which are 2 of the main tributaries for the bull trout for Lake Kookanusa, have declined substantially. those red counts have been fairly stable in the last 6 years. And because both streams went down at the same time, and we're concerned enough that we'd like to drop the allowance of harvest to catch and release only. Obviously, with bull trout being threatened, we manage those fish along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We've yet to be contacted by the service on this, but we're expecting that if we don't take action, the Fish and Wildlife Service will request that we do so. If we make this change today, it will get into the fishing reg booklet, which goes to the printers later today. So that's a little bit of why we're rushing to get it done. So our recommendation is to change the harvest to catch and release only for Lake Koocanusa, and the catch cards will still be required for that.
Thank you, Eileen. Do I have a motion from the commission?
I would second that, Mr. Chairman.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any members of the public here to comment on this closure? Elliott.
Chairman, members of the commission, for the record, Clayton Elliott, EL. Trout Unlimited, and I will be.
Thank you. Any further comment from the public on the motion? Any discussion from the commission?
Chairman, if I could, I'd like to ask a question, just hopefully a simple one. Do you have any record of the number of licenses sold to people to catch and keep, and how many were taken?
Commissioner Aldrich, members of the commission, Region 1 would probably be the best able to answer that. Mike Hensler, the Region 1 fish manager, is available.
Yes. Commissioner Aldrich, I didn't hear the question completely.
I'll try again and see if this thing's working. Mike, what I asked was if we had a record of the number of licenses that were sold to catch and keep on Koocanusa, and a record of how many were caught and kept.
So, yeah, Commissioner, the answer is yes, we do have that information. I don't have it handy right with me right now. We can get that to you. It's kind of hovers around now, around 800 permits issued, and around 100 bull trout harvested, something like 4 or 5 times that amount that are caught and released.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you for that, Tim. That's a good clarification. Any further discussion or questions from the commission? All in favor? Oh, sorry.
The comment, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of unknowns right now, and I think what's going on up in British Columbia in the selenium in the river, along with a lot of other atmospheric things that we have going on around us, obviously, I think conservatism is really.
Thank you. Seeing no more comment or discussion, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Aye.
Let's go ahead and we'll move to the petition. I think it's always good, Becky, would you, before we start, give the commission another overview of the process here and what our obligations are, and where we stand in the scheduling, kind of a recap of that on the record, I think makes some sense. So.
Colton, members of the commission, Becky Doctor, Chief Legal Counsel. Happy New Year. I'm back today after 2 weeks off, the first time I've had that since my son was born. So I did remember my password, which was a good thing. So we're after a good start today. As Chairman Colton requested, I'll give you an overview for the process for considering a petition. or authority for making the decision. And then I'll give you some information on some information that the petitioner requested in an email regarding some statute and some requirements for review of rules. And I'll save that for the end. First off, the individual has a right to petition the commission, actually petition an agency. So it could be the department or the commission. In this circumstance, it is the commission because you have the authority to make recreational use on the waters in Montana. It's for any interested person, and so it's pretty easy standing requirement to overcome. An agency is defined as the commission, and so it does include the commission here. And in this particular circumstance, the petition requests an adoption of an exception to an administrative rule, 2 of them, that prohibits the use of a watercraft on the Bitterroot and the Clark Fork rivers over 20 horsepower. And so it would be adoption of an exception to a current rule. Commission authority for addressing petitions is found by statute, and you are required to respond within 60 days after the submission of a petition, unless the petitioner allows a longer time. In this case, Mr. Cruz, the petitioner, did allow the commission to take longer to address the petition, and your requirement is to either deny the petition in writing or initiate rulemaking on the petition. The process then, and you're going to be comfortable with this because we just did this not long ago on the Madison River rulemaking, is to conduct a hearing. That's what you're doing here today. Allow time for the petitioner to present their petition, usually 15 minutes in the past is the practice for 15 minutes. Department to present their perspectives, public comment, and then questions from the commission. All of that then will be used as record evidence for your decision in this matter. And the record evidence is then put into a writing for the decision. And that will be done by the legal unit. I will help you with that once you actually make your decision here. Must be in writing, and so that's the reason why I can help you with that. On the Madison River, we did the same thing. We drafted a draft decision and had the chair look at it and sign it. And then the next steps will be if you initiate rulemaking, we would write a rule that would be then put through the Secretary of State's administrative rulemaking process. That process is entirely separate from this petition process. So even if you allow the petition to move forward into rulemaking, there is a chance that at the end you deny the rule altogether and vote not to do the rule once you take public comment on the rule. And that whole process is separate. You probably are familiar with that process, and that is filing a notice with the Secretary of State, going out for public comment, doing hearings, responding to those comments, and then coming back to the commission again for a final vote whether or not you want to adopt that rule. So there are essentially 2 processes that will occur if you decide to initiate rulemaking on this petition. If you deny it, we're done today, but if you initiate, we've got another process to go through. That kind of ends the authority and the process. If you don't have any questions for me, I will just put on the record a response to a request from the petitioner on some other on another matter. Is that okay if I move forward with that? Okay. The petitioner requested information regarding a statute that requires every state agency to review its administrative rules every 2 years. That's for every state agency in Montana to review its administrative rules to ensure that they're legally sound, likely because every 2 years we have a legislative session that could change the authority of the department or the commission to make rules. It could change the substance of the rules. And we are required to go through all of our administrative rules and ensure that those are compliant. That we do after every legislative session. We ensure that our rules are still legally sound. That's a pretty broad requirement. More specifically, though, the rule that Mr. Cruz is requesting to change on the Bitterroot requires that the department look at recreational use on the Bitterroot River every 5 years, starting in 2022. And so this particular rule will be up for looking substantively at the recreational use on Bitterroot River starting in 2022. And the question was, how do you reconcile the two? And the way I reconcile the two is that one is a very broad requirement that we do after every session to ensure that our rules are legal and still sound. The other one is still going to start in 2022, but it's a more substantive process to ensure that our recreational use rules are substantively addressing the recreational use on the Bitterroot River. And so that's how I would reconcile those two rules. One doesn't absolve us from doing the review every 2 years. It's just that there's a required more substantive look on the Bitterroot River every 5 years. And so that was, I just wanted to make sure that was answered on the record for Mr. Cruz. So is there any questions for me? I'll be here throughout so that if you do have questions, I can answer them then.
And Becky, I assume as part of the record of evidence that is developed is the comment that we've received to date as well.
Yes,
It's been coming in at a fairly regular clip. Okay.
Chairman Colton, yes, we've taken that. It's come to both the commissioners. And so because you will consider it in your decision, it is part of the administrative record.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the commission for Becky?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Just to be clear, the review isn't a revision or a reinitiation of rulemaking for each rule. It's just a cursory review.
Chairman Colton, Commissioner Bioth, yes, you're right. So the statutory run is a statutory review required, doesn't provide any specific information about what needs to be reviewed. It says they have to be reviewed every 2 years. More specifically, though, the one that was initiated during the rulemaking process on the Bitterroot River was specific that we have to look at the recreational use rules on the Bitterroot River every 5 years. And that was actually done pursuant to public comment during that rulemaking. Wasn't specifically proposed when the department proposed the rules, but the public commented that they wanted a more robust review on those rules every 5 years. And so the commission saw fit to put that in the administrative rule. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And the statutory review has taken place. I mean, you guys do that as a matter of course after the session, as you stated.
Yes, Chair Colton, we actually do it pretty regularly. I would say more than biennially, but at least biennially.
Right. And so we have the statutory review that takes place, and then the review that we placed upon ourselves through rulemaking.
Chair Colton, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions from the commission? Okay, Mr. Cruz, you're the petitioner here. As Becky stated, these are typically, when we did the Madison, we limited the presentation to 15 minutes. I'm not going to be hard and fast on that with you today, but we would appreciate summary, but as concise as possible.
This morning, I'd like to start with a PowerPoint presentation. Petition to amend ARM's 12/11, 3:30, 12/11. Watercraft on the Clark Fork and Bitterroot Rivers. Hovercraft should be exempt from the horsepower. Currently, the Clark Fork River is available for motorized watercraft traffic from St. John's Fishing Act.
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Brower. Sorry to interrupt,
Yes,
but would the petitioner please clearly speak into the mic because I cannot hear him at all?
And this is a challenge for all of us, Mr. Cruz, but it is important that you talk right into that, as frustrating as that is. Otherwise, the regions can't hear you at all.
Hey, how's this?
Can you hear that at all, Logan?
Yeah, much better, thank you. Sorry to be a pain,
Hey.
I just want to hear everything.
No, that's important.
All right, thank you. Okay, currently the Clark Fork River is available for motorized watercraft traffic from the St. John's Fishing Access Site to Harper's Bridge Fishing Access Site from October 1st through June 15th, with the exception of personal watercraft. The route will be in light blue on the provided map. From June 16th through September 30th, motorized watercraft traffic is restricted to 20 horsepower or less. The section we're talking about is right here, from basically Petty Creek Landing to the Harper's Bridge. From May 1st through June 15th, the Clark Fork is open to motorized watercraft from Harper's Bridge Fishing Access Site to the Kelly Island Fishing Access Site, with the exception of personal watercraft. The route will be in yellow on the map. October 1st through January 31st, this section is open only to motorized watercraft using 20 horsepower left. The remainder of the year is float only. Section right there. The blow up on the left shows from Harper's Bridge right up to the Kelly Island. Currently, the Bitterroot River is available from October 1st through January 31st for motorized watercraft traffic from the convergence with the Clark Fork River, including the Kelly Island Fishing Access Site, all the way south to the headwaters of the Bitterroot River. The route's in dark blue on the map. The remainder of the year it is float only. Section we're talking about right there. From Kelly Island launch all the way south to the headwaters. The Montana Fish and Wildlife map that has been provided to you does not show the entire section of the Bitterroot River that is open to motorized watercraft. From Petty Creek Fishing Access Site to the headwaters of the Bitterroot River is available from October 1st through January 31st to motorized watercraft not to exceed 20 horsepower. And that's that section right there, the Bitterroot River. Waters converge down near Connors. So what do these rules mean? To put it simply, the rules say that for the Bitterroot River, from the Kelly Island Fishing Access Site, that a boater can only use a motorboat that is powered with a motor that is 20 horsepower or less during that time, from October 1st through January 31st. I am really not even going to go into the aspects of motorboating on either of these two rivers using a 20 horsepower equipped motorboat during 4 of the most potentially coldest months of the year. I'm only going to discuss hovercraft horsepower and related issues because that's what the petition is about. We will provide new information and facts that were probably not available to the Commission or the general public when the current rules were established. Horsepower restrictions that have been applied to a motorboat should not be applied to a hovercraft because they simply cannot be met. Hovercraft, seaplanes, and wigs are not boats. An outboard motorboat has a portable detachable motor incorporating drive shaft and propeller that is clamped or bolted to the stern or in a well within the hull. The motorboat engine usually turns the propeller acting against the water. Although a better and safer option is a short shaft jet outboard. I'm only going to discuss hovercraft and related issues because that's what the petition is about. Horsepower restrictions that have been applied to a motorboat should not be applied to a hovercraft because they simply cannot be met. Hovercraft seaplanes, sometimes called float planes, and wigs are not boats. Hovercraft are a unique craft that is neither a boat nor airplane. They were first invented by Christopher Cockerell in 1955 in the United Kingdom, and the first patent was issued there. Numerous design changes have been since patented. By design, by patent, and by scientific and engineering documentation, hovercraft are not boats. There are some definitions in the Montana Code. By the way, there's an error on the agenda item cover sheet at the bottom of the first page under agency recommendation and rationale. The code reference is incorrect. The correct code is 23.25027A of the Montana Code. Listed as 505. 23.2502 definitions as used in this part unless context clearly requires a different meaning. The following definitions applies. 23.25027A, motorboat means a vessel including a personal watercraft or pontoon propelled by machinery, motor, or engine of any description, whether or not the machinery, motor, or engine is the principal source of propulsion. The term includes boats temporarily equipped with attachable motors or engines, such as a blow-up raft with a trolling motor. These are examples of motorboats. You probably recognize something like that, right? How about a Mokai kayak? The Mokai kayak is a 9.5 horsepower inboard industrial engine with a jet drive and can reach speeds of 20 miles per hour. This is legal on the Bitterroot and Clark Fork rivers from October 1st to January 31st. Or a stick boat. Image sources from stickboats.com. These are stick boats. They are usually equipped with a 17.5 horsepower four-stroke inboard jet and can run as little as 3 inches of water. This is legal on the Clark Fork and Bitterroot 10-1 through 131. Next question should be, what is a vessel? 23.50219, vessel means every description of watercraft unless otherwise defined by the department other than a seaplane on the water used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on water. United States Coast Guard term for vessel. The word vessel includes every description of watercraft including non-displacement craft, which are hovercraft, wig craft, and seaplanes used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on water. It's a little bit of difference between state law and the United States Coast Guard. Seems like every watercraft ought to be covered, right? Not really. In 1955, Christopher Cockrell was granted the patent for improvements in or relating to vehicles for traveling over land and or water. Patent number GB 854211. Interested? There's a link right here. It's in your packet that I gave you. You can look that up and see the patent, see information on the patent. Hovercraft are not boats by patent or design. The difference is important because even the United States Coast Guard understands that hovercrafts are built and designed to operate differently than a boat. There are even special signal lighting requirements that hovercraft pilots have to meet. Anytime you're in non-displacement mode, you have to have a yellow flashing light on top of the hovercraft that beats at 120 beats per minute. Hovercraft are air-cushioned vehicles. They have two modes of operation. Displacement mode, when they're operating at very slow speed. This is a point where a hovercraft is not moving quite fast enough to escape the depression created under the craft due to the air cushion. This mode, they will create a wake like a boat, but they're still operating on a cushion of air. The hull is not in contact with the water. The other mode of operation is called non-displacement mode. In non-displacement mode, a hovercraft leads only a slight wake while moving across the water. This occurs at different speeds for different hovercraft, usually between 5 and 7 miles per hour. The hovercraft travels at a speed where the weight of the water it displaces cannot catch up with the hovercraft. Thus, there's very little wake behind the craft. Boats displace water by action of floating the hull. The hull sets in the water and presses down into the water to the point where the weight of the boat and the weight of the water moved out of the way are equal. How deep the boat rides in the water is called draft. Hovercraft are divided into two parts. A single-engine hovercraft called an integrated hovercraft. This engine provides lift air to raise the craft over the surface it will be traveling and provides thrust for movement and maneuvering of the craft. About 33% of the horsepower used by the single-engine craft is used for lift air. The remaining horsepower is used for thrust and maneuvering. So if you have a 60 horsepower engine, 20 horsepower will be to provide lift and 40 for thrust. An integrated hovercraft uses a single engine for generating both lift and thrust. That's a basic drawing of an integrated craft. If you see the engine in green in the back of the hovercraft, airflow comes in, blows out the back, and some of it's diverted down and comes out the little holes alongside of the fuselage, and that air lifts the hovercraft above whatever surface it's on. A multi-engine hovercraft commercially produced for the private citizens is normally equipped with two engines. Lift engine works or provides air to raise the hovercraft, allowing the craft to hover over the surface below the craft. The thrust engine provides the force for the propulsion and maneuvering using a fan at the rear of the craft. Multi-engine hovercraft use two engines to separate lift and thrust functions. This particular hovercraft, you'll see the green engine, which is the thrust engine, and at the front you'll see a lift engine. The thrust engine provides simply thrust air and maneuvering air, while the lift engine simply provides a lift. It's usually about a 30-70 split. So you have about 30 horsepower up front, you'd have 70 at the back if you had 100 horsepower. For example, a Coastal Pro 2 hovercraft designed by the British Hovercraft Company uses a 17.5 horsepower engine to provide lift and a 37 horsepower engine to provide thrust. These tend to be very efficient and reasonably quiet when using four-stroke engines. Lift engine is located in the front under a cowling and is muffled inside the shroud. The rear engine is located in the rear and has twin exhaust systems, very quiet. The following slide shows a twin-engine craft and a single-engine craft often used for search and rescue. The blue hovercraft uses 37 horsepower thrust, 17.5 horsepower lift. The white craft uses a 55 horsepower engine to provide lift and thrust. These are the lowest horsepower configurations available for these craft. Both of these craft are commercially produced and will carry about 800 pounds of payload. Both are state-of-the-art designs, and both meet the noise level requirements specified in the Montana Code. I recognize that lake? Como. That guy in a white hovercraft traveled all the way from South to come visit our state. He stayed here 4 days. The 20 horsepower limit was written for motorboats, not hovercraft. Part of the petition is requesting the Commission to create a definition for hovercraft as authorized by 23.502.19 Montana Code. Vessel means every description of watercraft unless otherwise defined by the department, other than a seaplane on the water used or capable of being used as a means of transportation. We're not asking for an exemption to the definition of a hovercraft as a vessel. We're asking you to define a hovercraft because it's not in your code. A little new information, the definition of vessel did not include wing and ground effect craft. However, the state legislature did in fact recognize that seaplanes are not vessels. That means the state legislature understands there may be other watercraft that are not vessels and allows the department the discretion to make necessary definitions outside 23.25027A. Since hovercraft are patented as something other than a boat should warrant the department defining a hovercraft outside of 23.25027A. The department and commission should also recognize that hovercraft's operational characteristics and power requirements are different from those of a motorboat. This depicts, the yellow circle depicts a hovercraft in nominal conditions where you've got a standard surface, wind, and load. If you change any one of those things, for example, if you really go on a rough surface, like you're running over rough water or rough ground, then you're not going to be able to carry as much load and you're not going to be able to fight as much wind. Same thing, if you're carrying a heavy load, you can't go over as rough a surface and you can't fight as much wind. And of course, if you're running a heavy wind, then you have to be very careful of your surface and your load. The universal application of a horsepower limit to all motorized watercraft might be inappropriate. As you can see with the hovercraft, many factors play into how a hovercraft will perform. If you attempt to restrict horsepower, even on such a small river as the Bitterroot River, you may endanger the craft pilot, passengers, and the craft itself. Were any marine craft designers or engineers employed or consulted during the 20 horsepower rulemaking process? Obviously, under nominal conditions, there is a certain flow of water, a certain depth of water that a watercraft operator has to deal with. Who did the engineering or design evaluation to be able to say for a fact that 20 horsepower can deal with any conditions on the Bitterroot or Clark Fork rivers? I I have been unable to locate and read the scientific and engineering documentation to support the application of the 20 horsepower limit, and the justification is how it was universally applied to all watercraft, including hovercraft, which were not discussed in the rulemaking process. Does the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks have a process by which these evaluations and decisions are made? If not, what process was used to make the decision? There are many engineers around the world who have been and are currently working on making watercraft lighter, use less horsepower, maneuver more quickly, and do more work. Currently, the hovercraft I have are state-of-the-art design, the best I could purchase, some of the best made in the world. That blue hovercraft and the trailer that goes with it costs $42,000. Were any hovercraft or were any watercraft design specifications reviewed by a competent marine engineer with any engineering evaluation document recorded for reference regarding the blanket application of the 20 horsepower rule? For example, a boat of 18 feet requires a minimum of X horsepower to ensure the adequate propulsion and maneuverability while carrying Z pounds worth of cargo and passengers with a stream flow Y velocity while transiting upstream in 18 inches of water. Have to match the boat with the minimum propulsion requirement for a certain load in the boat to ensure adequate maneuvering power. Do not believe the hovercraft were discussed during the deliberations regarding the rulemaking in reference to ARM 1211-610 or ARM 1211-620. That was pretty much confirmed by Region 2 Fish and Wildlife Parks Manager Pat Saffel in his statement to the Missoulian. Because hovercraft are uniquely designed and patented is the very reason to add the definition of hovercraft to ARM 1211-330. The Department is authorized to do this in accordance with 23.2.5. This shot was taken at Whitefish Lake, July 2019. We encountered 1 to 2 foot chop at the lake. At one point, the boat wakes I was fighting were 2 to 3 feet waves. The Coastal Pro 2 hovercraft is rated for State 3 Seas as engineered. By the way, the Whitefish Fire Department has a Neoteric hovercraft outfitted for rescue work, very similar to the one I showed you earlier. Problem regarding ARM 1211, 610, and 620 is that the rules are created to address problems with boats, floaters, tubers, and boaters. Noted, hovercraft are not boats. Motorboat 20 horsepower rule cannot be met with current hovercraft designs. I want to bring your attention to the following rule. ARM 1211-410 River Recreation Management Plans and Rules generally. The highest priority of management plan is providing protection for the following resources. The quality of the fisheries. Hovercraft do not damage the fisheries. They do not place a propeller in the water, do not discharge their exhaust in the water, have minimal probability of polluting the water. Hovercraft are normally launched dry. That prevents axle grease, differential fluid, brake dust and fluid, road salts, oils and debris from entering the water with a minimal probability of invasive species transport, unlike boats, trailers, outboard motors, and trucks entering the water to launch. Click the link below for an example of hovercraft that has been removed from the transport device and will launch from the parking lot. If it doesn't show, we'll move on. We'll move on, and y'all can watch that separately. If you go to YouTube and type in Jim Cruz hovercraft, you can watch a bunch of hovercraft videos. That's fine. Engine noise is very moderate and dissipates quickly. And on a river, the sound dissipates more quickly. In an area where shrubs are located, the sounds are very quickly absorbed and baffled by the natural terrain. Quote from the British Hovercraft Company. At just 74 dBA, the award-winning Coastal Pro is probably the quietest production hovercraft available in Europe. This is the Coastal Pro 2 marketed by Hoverstream Hovercraft out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And if you could have seen the video, you'd have seen there was no wake when the hovercraft ran across the water, which is also some people's concern. Wildlife. I do not know of anyone who has harmed any form of wildlife or people while using a hovercraft. In fact, if you want to see a benefit of hovercraft, stranded deer are rescued frequently by hovercraft operators. Hovercraft can ferry ice fishermen on the safest forms of ice and mud rescue, transport, and work well even in residential flood. Remember Hurricane Harvey? Or how many of you went to Roundup during the last flood? A hovercraft would have been invaluable there. If you want to see it, there's a link to take you to rescuing deer, or you can go to YouTube and just search rescue deer with hovercraft. Noise created by hovercraft is very transitory and diminishes by the inverse square rule. Any noise transmitted is above the water, not in the water as with the boat. Noise level will also diminish when one goes around a bend in the river due to natural baffling. Boat motor noise can actually travel hundreds of miles in water. Any submarine sailor knows this. By the way, I am a qualified submarine sailor. Water, CA, that we don't pollute it. Riparian habitat and hovercraft generally leave no wake unless below non-displacement mode speed. Bank erosion on a river such as the Bitterroot and Clark Fork are minimal compared to the seasonal flood or runoff event. I would think riparian habitat is damaged more by foot traffic in the river, boats grounding, tube floaters, dragging their coolers behind their tube, or littering along the banks. Hovercraft operators do not leave much of a footprint. Compared to a jet boat, a hovercraft leaves a much smaller wake when in non-displacement mode. Most folks are very surprised to see this. There's a link that we're not even going to try to get work here that shows a Coastal Pro 2 doing 28 miles per hour with 600 pounds of cargo in it, with an 880-pound hovercraft. That's 1,480 pounds, and there is no wake behind the hovercraft. Other natural resources in or along the river. Hovercraft do not normally touch the surface over which it is traveling. If a hovercraft is landed, there is almost no trace of the landing. Management plans or rules must not allow unlimited recreation to compromise long-term conservation. As far as I can tell, there's no management plan for the lower Bitterroot River nor for the Clark Fork River between Kelly Island and Petty Creek Fishing Access Site. So the $37 question, what is the plan for recreational family motorboating on the lower Bitterroot River? Following the implementation of Rule 1211-610 and the apparent reasoning behind the rule, there does not seem to be any recreational family motorboating. I have a copy of the management plan for the upper Bitterroot and West Fork Bitterroot River. The management plan for the upper Bitterroot clearly indicates that the river is used commercially and that local anglers were not common, primarily due to too many outfitters and guides, too many float anglers, and too crowded. References page 5 and 6 of your management plan for the upper Bitterroot and West Fork Bitterroot River. Management plans and rules must maintain a balance between quality of experience and unlimited quantity of experience. C2. Are there any limits on out-of-state fishing licenses as there are on hunting licenses? Are local opportunities being displaced by out-of-state opportunities? Point to note, I've been told that ARM 1211-410 does not apply to me as a citizen. It applies to the department for developing rules. I have a problem with that. Rules are a double-edged sword, and they must be. If you write a rule for a citizen to obey, you must also consider that it may not be possible for the citizen to obey a rule. If you write a rule that a citizen cannot obey, then you've removed the rights. I can find nowhere in the FWP ARMs where there is an applicability statement. How do you tell who has to obey which ones of the ARM Title 12 rules? Rule 1211-410-4 is part of the problem. You see, it was written apparently without regard to how much a citizen has to pay to exercise his rights. As I go through the rule, I believe my point will be clearly made. In order not to discriminate against a single citizen, the rules must be fair and applied equally from one class or culture of a people to another. Management plans and rules must be technically and socially feasible. The ARMs nor the MCA provides a definition of technically feasible. I believe it means the process of validating the technology assumptions, architecture, and design of a product or project. As far as the technical feasibility of designing and building a hovercraft that can meet the 20 horsepower rule in order to carry myself, my wife, and 2 grandchildren, it's not possible with current technology and materials. I purchased the lowest horsepower hovercraft that I can buy in the United States that can carry 2 adults and 2 children. It's not technically feasible to reduce the lift or thrust horsepower any further and maintain a nominal level of performance and safety. These points alone should be cause to grant the exemption to the 20 horsepower rule. Legal. If you please, the Montana Fish and Wildlife and Parks Chief Legal Counsel and the Attorney General will have to address the legality of the rule. Affordable. I'm told that this does not apply to the citizen, that the department is not concerned with how much it costs the citizens to meet a rule. I think that if you write a rule that you must make sure the public, the people who pay the taxes, do not have to expend a significant amount of money in order to meet a rule. For example, the 20 horsepower rule that the commission has enacted cannot be met for anyone with a commercially produced hovercraft. They do not exist. Again, I point out that a hovercraft were not discussed during the deliberations. To apply a motorboat rule to a hovercraft is wrong. I've not been able to find scientific or engineering support for the decision. By applying 20 horsepower rule to a hovercraft, an entire class and culture of citizens are not allowed to exercise their right to recreate equally on the river with the commercial fishing industry. If I want to have a special craft designed to carry one, possibly two persons, it will cost $11,500, take 6 weeks to build the kit at the factory, then a 6-day round trip to Houston, Texas to pick up the kit because it's too large to ship, then 1 to 2 weeks assembly time. I don't consider that affordable, neither should the commission. One of your jobs is listed in the Montana Code is to maintain recreational opportunities. That comes under ARM 12-11013. I know from my verbal communications with department personnel that cost to the citizen is not a concern for the department or commission. If that is truly the case, then we have a huge problem. The department and commission are servants of the people, not our masters. What has been created on the Bitterroot River is a commercial fishing enterprise. As for family recreational motor boating or recreational hovercraft usage, it is apparently not a consideration. What is considered as acceptable is motorboat usage going downstream for waterfowl hunting. It's interesting that Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has a motto. It's right on the agenda cover sheet. The outside is in us all. It is, only if you hunt or fish. Incidentally, it was not affordable for many folks in the Bitterroot Valley to have to buy a new outboard motor that can meet the 15 or then 20 horsepower limit, nor to have to buy a new boat to match the motor to the boat. In addition to that rule was written for the following reason. Where horsepower restrictions were adopted, 20 horsepower was chosen because it's the largest portable motor horsepower, thus reducing speed and noise while providing fall hunting opportunities and access to lands.
It should wrap up in about 5 minutes here, please.
Yes, sir. I will. Thank you, sir. That's straight off the current agenda item cover sheet. Does that sound like discrimination? Quite a few citizens think so. It appears that family recreation on the Bitterroot River was not a significant consideration for anyone on the commission nor the department at the time these rules were created. I'm going to go ahead and jump forward here to get to the conclusion. Before I close our presentation, I thought it might be educational to examine some of our resources at some of our launch sites. As an active hovercraft pilot, I've chosen to spend some time looking at what we have available for use and taking some notes for future reference and potential improvements. Bitterroot fishing sites. The Kelly Island site. It's not a bad site. It's a little slippery when you get snow on it. Florence Bridge access site. It's not too bad. It's a little rutted. It's sandy. It could be used. Steamsville Fishing Access Site is a private owned site. Tucker Crossing Fishing Access Site is not usable. We can't do that. That would destroy anything that we put in the water. Same thing for Woodside. Woodside Crossing is pretty bad. Those gaps in that concrete right there cause you to lose all lift on your hovercraft. You'd ground out and bust your hull. However, we were up at Salmon. Wow. You guys have done an excellent job of maintaining the champion donation up there. It's really, really good. It's a beautiful site, and we love going up there and flying on that lake. Summary, I'm asking the commission to recognize that hovercraft are not boats. I'm asking the commission to write a definition for hovercraft and place it in ARM 1211-330 as authorized by 23.250219. And I'm asking the commission to recognize that hovercraft have different operational power requirements than do motorboats, and that hovercraft are distinct motorized watercraft. I'm asking the commission to exempt hovercraft from the 20 horsepower rule because it's exceedingly difficult and very expensive to meet. Horsepower restrictions on a hovercraft serve no purpose. Closing, thank you for your attention and consideration regarding our concerns. We, all of us, have an excellent opportunity to embellish the recreational opportunities in the Bitterroot Valley. Thank you, sirs and ma'am, for your time and your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. Questions for the petitioner from the commission?
Yes, Mr. Cruz. Were you around here and participating in any of the meetings that were ongoing at the time these current rules were being discussed?
Commissioner Aldrich, I was working 10 to 16 hours a day in Montana, Wyoming, and Utah trying to make a living. I've been here 20 years, and for most of the time I've been here, I've had to work like that. But now that I'm retired, I'm finding some time to take a look and enjoy things and see how Montana.
Further questions for Mr. Cruz? Thank you, sir. Do we have members of the public here that want to comment? And I would like to start with the regions, actually, before we go live. Let's start with Region 1. Is there anybody in Region 1 that wants to comment on the petition? Moving to Region 2. Is there anybody in 2? Doesn't look like.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to comment this morning. My name is John D. Armament. I'm with the Clark Fork Coalition. We're a 3,000-member watershed group in western Montana dedicated to the restoration and protection of the Clark Fork River watershed. We were actively involved in 2011 in the process that resulted in the current restrictions. We think those are working very well right now. They are widely supported. The petitioner's comments notwithstanding, we think that both by the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, hovercraft fall under those restrictions right now. We think carving out a special exemption for them is a mistake. It would be bad for fish and wildlife, bad for recreation, bad for river aesthetics, bad for safety, and really bad for the process, sort of making a mockery of the 2011 process that got us where we are today. Again, a system that's working quite well. For all of those reasons, we oppose this petition and we urge the commission to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment from Region 2.
Oh, no. No, I'm not the public.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my name's William Ritchie. I live in Florence on the Bitterroot River, and I have another lot that's just north of us on the river. And the Bitterroot River is, I'm sure as all of you know, a very special and unique river. It changes course significantly. Right now it's flowing probably 150 feet from our house. And the thought of a hovercraft coming by and creating what is the petitioner's temporarily easily dispersed noise is an extreme irritant to those of us that live on the river. Also, we face on the river extreme changes in the erosion factors from year to year, and it's very, very difficult to understand where the river is going to go. Anything that would increase the traffic, and I assume we wouldn't do this just for one person when everybody else is probably against it. So I assume there would be eventually more hovercraft and more people taking advantage of that. And it will increase erosion and it will increase people tramping up on the banks. And that is a difficulty that we're looking at as far as our house is concerned. So I would very much urge you to stay within the rules that you have. They do seem to be working. I was fairly critical of them when they came out, but they do seem to be working fairly well, and I don't think making an exemption for one person really makes a whole lot of sense. Thank you.
Further comment from Region 2.
Morning, Commission. My name is Kevin Farron. I'm here representing the Montana chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We have 3,200 dues-paying members here in Montana. We value hunting and fishing in a natural setting, and we work on behalf of our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. We ask that this commission deny this petition to reclassify the hovercraft as a vessel and exempt the hovercraft from the widely agreed upon limit of 20 horsepower back in 2011. As you guys know, and what's been talked about today, this was agreed upon because 20 horsepower motors are relatively quiet. They're not too fast. They're not objectionable to most of the other river recreationalists and residents along the river, while still allowing hunters to traditionally or to access traditional fall hunting locations. So in other words, this traditional access and opportunity were upheld without significantly impacting the user experience or the wildlife. With these high horsepower hovercrafts, however, they're noisy, disruptive, and would negatively impact aquatic and terrestrial life in these river corridors, as well as other recreationists and residents along the Clark Fork and Bitter Rivers. We feel that Mr. Cruz is in some ways twisting this petition to be about safety, claiming that hovercrafts could be used by emergency personnel for search and rescue efforts. When considering other traditional use groups and the curvy and shallow nature of these river corridors, we'd argue that hovercrafts are actually more dangerous. And when we consider search and rescue, it's important to also point out that first responders already have the tools at their disposal to help with rescue efforts that the general public does not. For example, I've seen jet boats and jet skis ripping up and down Brennan's Wave, taking part in emergency searches, something the public is not able to do. And if our first responders truly needed hovercrafts to successfully do their job, we're assuming that they could have or already have other methods of securing this permission. But our greatest concern is the technology creep that this petition represents. All of those pictures that Mr. Crew provided in his PowerPoint, for example, and the message this change would send others, just because there exists today the technology and personal vehicles making it effortless to exploit each nook and cranny of our public lands, waters, of our public waters and public lands. That does not mean that we should permit these technologies, or doing so would be in the best interest of the public or the resource. In our opinion, Mr. Cruz's petition in the PowerPoint perfectly exemplifies the need for FWP to re-examine the need for sensible and enforceable motorized use restrictions on certain Montana streams to maintain that current balance and traditional use balance before the opportunity for that balance is gone. But for starters, we ask that FWP please deny this petition. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comment from Region 2?
That's all for Region 2.
Thank you. Region 3? Any commenters from Region 3? 4?
None here.
Okay, great. 5 looks fairly empty. 6 looks empty. And 7 is completely empty. Okay. We'll bring it back here in Helena for comment from people here in the room. Apologies, Logan, do you got something?
No, I can wait till commission comment.
Okay, thanks. Okay, go ahead, whoever is here in Helena wants to comment.
Bias, Executive Director. Right there. Oh, there we go. I represent over 300 professional outfitters and 500 professional guides across the state of Montana. FOAM opposes any modification of the arm rules that might modify current restrictions on motorized uses on the Bitterroot and Clark Fork rivers, as included in the current petition by Mr. Cruz. We encourage that the Fish and Wildlife Commission deny this petition.
Thank you, Mr. Bice. Further comment here in Helena.
Oh, you do. You almost have to bite it. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to comment. My name is Chris Grove. I came wearing two hats, but Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has already made a comment, so I'm not going to reiterate that. I would like to comment as a private individual living along the Bitterroot River. As a retired biologist, river recreation manager, and district ranger in Yakutat, Alaska, in the Middle Fork District of the Salmon Chalice National Forest, I do have some experience with river recreation. I live on the river, and I spend a lot of time there. I watch people go down the river every day, and it does extend to now. People float the river even now hunting ducks. I don't notice too much motorized use. The thing that really strikes me about the Bitterroot River is how much use it gets, and how well, even though the use is very heavy now, how well that works. People are generally friendly. I haven't noticed any altercations. There's not much conflict. I talk to people going by just out of interest because of my past occupation, and it seems to be working really well. I do have some intense concerns with Mr. Cruz's proposal. The first is just public safety. I've operated a jet boat. I've never operated a hovercraft, but in some ways there are some similarities. Hovercraft are high-speed vessels, and they have to maintain some forward speed in order to have control of the vessel. They float around on a cushion of air. It's almost frictionless, and so they respond really well to any inclined surface or wind. And so the slower you go, the more difficult they become to have directional control over. You already have a rule that keeps hovercraft or any motorboat, any vessel, 50 foot from people in the water, from swimmers. On the Bitterroot River, that would almost be impossible to do in the summertime. And if hovercraft are exempted from the rule, then the seasonal use limits are not applicable anymore because they're not a vessel. So we're talking about year-round use. Again, a big public safety concern. It's a narrow river. There are bends in it. There is a lot of use on it, everywhere from tubers to swimmers. I myself snorkel in the river. I'm hard to see when I'm doing that. Surfacing regularly, of course, to breathe, but still, a swimmer is difficult to see, especially when traveling at high speed. I would have no, as Mr. Cruz points out, there's no sound in the water. I'd have no warning that craft was coming. The second one, my other concern is diminished water quality. They are a mechanical machine. Sooner or later, those machines have failures. With a boat, it's going to float on the water. Most people have oars, paddles, some other way of maintaining control of the craft. With a hovercraft, that's not going to happen. And the Bitterroot has a lot of, again, curves, sweepers, etc. The craft would be swept into one of those eventually, and eventually you are going to have an accident. You are going to have a wreck with a high-speed craft, and fuel and oil is going to end up in the water. For practical purposes, hovercraft are watercraft. In Montana, that's about the only place they can operate, and that's why this petition is before you. So where else can they go? They have to go on the water. As Mr. Cruz points out, all of his pictures, all of his examples are given our operation on a water surface. This proposal does not serve, this is about a narrow group of users. It's about a small group proposing this for their own self-interest. It does not serve the greatest good for the greatest number in the long run. It's not about improving the conditions on the Bitterroot River. Hovercraft noise is disruptive to the residents, to the other users, and the wildlife. The photo of Mr. Cruz wearing ear protection while operating his hovercraft says it all. It's not a pleasant sound to be exposed to. I don't look forward to the possibility of hovercraft going by my house every day on the Bitterroot River. Conflict with other users. Right now, everyone seems to be getting along. They're all moving in the same direction. It's an interesting mix of people out there on the river, everyone from swimmers to tubers to boaters, rafters, drift boats, guides, private people. It's not about industrial use on the Bitterroot River. The people I see on the Bitterroot River are not always fishing. They're not always guided fishermen. There's a lot of people on the Bitterroot River that they fish it. I included, fish it by myself as a private individual. People float it, people tube it. They're hauling coolers and tubes. It's an interesting mix going down the river, I can tell you that. So when you look at that and you consider high-speed upstream use, and you look at families coming down the river, conflict is going to be inevitable. And when people feel that they're endangered or their kids are endangered, things get pretty intense. And so I don't look forward to that kind of conflict out in front of my house. And I can tell you the wardens and the sheriff's department are not going to look forward to that kind of conflict either. They already have full-time jobs. Excuse me. If you allow hovercraft use, then what rationale is there to deny jet boat or airboat use? The same arguments can be made. The only difference really we're talking about here is wake. And when you start, my canoe throws a wake, so then you start talking about, well, how much wake? How much wake is acceptable? How often is wake acceptable? And does the commission really want to go there to try and write rules on that? And so if it's not a watercraft, then what rules are you going to apply to it? And that involves a whole new rule-making process. And as Mr. Cruz pointed out, a lot of us have other things to do besides rehash what was already decided in 2011. So the other part is that the 20 horsepower limit. The 20 horsepower limit does not deny anyone access to the river. And it's not a matter of cost. I access the river. I comply with the 20 horsepower limit. And hundreds, if not thousands of people comply with that limit going down the river. A lot of them choose to use no motor. I haven't seen many people use motors, but the fact is that the rule that's in place now does not deny anybody access to the river. There's plenty of fishing access sites. There's plenty of ways to access the river, either by walking, boating, tubing, or swimming. All that is available. And the petition seems to imply that because the vehicle is commercially available and someone has the wherewithal to buy it, that you ought to allow use of that vehicle on the river. And the logical extension of that demonstrates the folly of that rationale. There's a lot of vehicles out there, a lot of equipment out there, that just because someone can buy it or it's offered commercially, it doesn't necessarily make sense that we should allow use of it on public land. And I think there's a lot of well-founded restrictions out there in place now that demonstrate that rationale. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment here in Helena.
Morning again, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Director Williams. For the record, Clayton Elliott, ELLIOTT, here today representing Montana Trout Unlimited, and I'm already looking forward to 2021 and the appropriations process that we can help get speakers. Dustin will be on my case in House Bill 10. But for it, to joke a little bit, I mean, I think part of the question, and to preface, certainly Montana Trout Unlimited is asking you to deny the petition today, but part of the preface, I think, is a statutory question and certainly mission, but we are talking about a statutory definition, in my opinion, and I think that question does rest in the legislature. We've had many conversations about the definition of vessel as it's related to AIS and other issues. So this is a more complex issue, I think, than just ARM. I'll be brief today. One, I would ask the commission to respect the public process that we were involved and engaged in 2011. I know certainly Commissioner Aldridge was involved in that process within the region. We think that process resoundingly spoke for the need for quiet recreation and the importance of the ecological benefits of these rivers. Montana Trout Unlimited and National Trout Unlimited have literally spent millions of dollars restoring the ecological integrity of the Clark Fork and Bitterroot River rivers. We certainly do not believe that more horsepower, more motorized recreation is a solution for protecting and continuing. Today, we just ask you to deny, on the purposes of ecological integrity of these rivers, this is not the right solution at this time.
There's that good. Chair Colton and Commissioners, I'm Nick Jivak. I'm the Conservation Director. Here to echo Clayton Elliott and TU's comments. Thank you.
Further comment here in Helena.
Commissioner Colton, Chairman Coulter and Commissioners, Craig Thomas, Stevensville. There's a lot of changes happening. It used to be a primitive area when I moved there. All these houses along the river, you talk about Hovercraft, some other vehicle going past somebody. Houses are there all of the time that you were in. Permanent. They're not leaving. People that are there, there's a lot of them now, and there's going to be a lot more. The rest of the world has developed our pristine, has discovered our pristine area. But we need to formulate some rules and regulations that are going to address what's coming at us, and it's coming at us fast. So we talk about how many fishermen on the river, how many floaters. Funeral just a year before on my friend's daughter who was tubing with him. He was able to save one in a series of second one. So there's some problems with the tubing as well. It's the number of users that we're going to have. Whether they're kayakers or walkers or swimmers or we're about to the point where there's going to have to be some numbers determined. You want to have 5 of the rafters within sight of one another. Boat in the December cold. The rest of the recreations. We only have so many fish to catch. We have a lot of mountains to look at. When you look at the mountain or take a picture of it, you don't take anything away from it. You take a little bit. Some of the things that we need to look at, irregardless of the outcome of what you do here, I would respectfully request that you consider the Salmon River site or the Salmon Lake site. My friends, Dennis Farnsworth, Wayne Matthews, and Gary Swanson perished in a plane crash. Champion was doing some surveying. Pork and the rest of us offered to the fishing, fish, wildlife, and parks that small portion of the land up there. Allow public access in a nice area. Has done an absolutely outstanding job in forfeited in this state. Wonderful place to be. And as you saw from the access sites, whether they are for fishing or for boat, and by the way, if it's a fishing access site, that doesn't mean you can pack your raft down there. Fishing access site. Consider those things, because if you get into the legalities of all this, it gets a little bit messy. Ask that whatever happens here, that the access sites in whatever manner are brought up to the same standards at the Salmon Lake spot. That's really like to thank you for all your efforts. This is any quest and
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the comments. Further comments here in Helena? Seeing none, I'll back to the commission. Commissioner Brower, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Chair Colton. And this might be for Becky, but if hovercraft were to be separately defined, would that mean we would have to make rules regarding hovercraft on all the waterways that the department manages?
Chair Colton, Commissioner Brower. However the commission decides, we can write a rule to accommodate. There are many conversations today about which statutes, which rules to amend. In the end, what's before you is to determine whether or not you want to allow hovercraft to operate on the Bitterroot River and the Clark Fork River in either by addressing the 20 horsepower or by allowing an exemption for it. And so you could do it specifically, you could do it more broadly, you could define hovercraft. There are many ways to do it. And whatever way you decide, we'll figure out how to write that. I'm sorry, I'm not more specific. I think it's probably the answer is however you want it, we can do it.
No, just to clarify, Becky, I guess at the start, and I might have missed being in and out of some of the conversation, I thought that the petitioner was also asking for hovercraft to be specifically identified or described. So that could have been a mistake on my part.
Chair Colton, Commissioner Brower, I do think that there is a request by the petitioner to define hovercraft and define it in a way that would exempt it from these rules that prohibit it from operation on the Bitterroot and Clark Fork. So you're correct.
Okay, thank you.
Further comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to just thank Mr. Cruz for undertaking this process. Participation in the public process can be a lot of work, as you described, and I appreciate your undertaking it and believing in the rule of law enough to follow through and do the work that it required.
Further discussion from the commission?
Chairman, I too would like to thank Mr. Cruz. He put in a lot of effort to put that forth in a way that you could make some of us understand it, even though we might never have been even close to a hovercraft. But I was in the Missoula area, you know, when 2011, and there was some really tough talk during the meetings. And I see Mr. Saffel, you know, the fisheries manager there in Region 2, Green as well. He may want to comment on this, but my recollection, you know, there was some heated words, you know, between people, because at that point in time it was jet skis and jet boats, you know, that they were talking about. Like you say, it was never about hovercraft. But I don't think that, in my own mind, I think that the biggest concerns were public health and safety. With all the users, as Mr. Thomas mentioned, there's just dozens of people. If you're out there, and I have some friends that have houses out there just above Kelly Island, and we can sit out in the yard in the summer and fall and spring, and people are going by you rapidly, and they're on stand-up boards, and they're in boats, and they're on inner tubes, and some are fishing, some are just having fun and whatever. But it's amazing the number of people that are on that river, and I think that the consensus back in 2011 was that with all that existing and varied use, mostly people downstream for sure, without motorized equipment, that having anything that would run up and down that river with any amount of speed whatsoever, and some of the crooks and turns and narrowness spots and the damn log jams that get developed every year as spring, you know, exerts its forces. It was terrible to expect that we were going to have a safe environment, you know, a healthful environment for the users if we allowed, you know, anything motorized going up and down that river. I think the 20 horsepower, you know, was a shot to say this will work in the fall, you know, for the duck and goose hunters and one thing and another, but it's probably not going to permit just exactly what you're wanting to permit, I think, you know, by changing the rules.
Thank you. Further discussion from the commission? I was on the commission in 2011 and worked on these rules and have vivid memory of the process. And I will assure you that it was a comprehensive and thoughtful process with a fair bit of conflict. I mean, there were interests on each side that wanted more unlimited motorized use, and those that, of course, didn't. And I have no doubt that every consideration was made and that we made a decision that represented the interests of pretty much everybody involved, and it was a fair and reasonable rule. And of course, those rules are going to be looked at as Becky stated earlier. So I appreciate Mr. Cruz's petition. It was informative. Do I have a motion from the commission?
Mr. Commissioner, or Chairman, I move that the Fish and Wildlife Commission deny the petition.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We've taken comment. If there's no further discussion from the commission, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. The petition is denied. Let's go ahead and take about a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and pick up with wildlife. White Rock Coulee easement.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Director Williams. Jason Cool. I'm the Hunting Access Bureau Chief out of the Wildlife Division here. The next item up is an endorsement for a White Rock Coulee right-of-way easement. This is a perpetual easement. The awesome complex, there's about 24,000 acres of public land in South Phillips County. There's a little bit of access on the north end, but this right-of-way easement would open up the middle and south end. It's a 2-mile right-of-way easement being endorsement, go out for EA.
Great. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the Fish and Wildlife Commission approve proceeding with further analysis and conducting an environmental assessment for a permanent public access road right-of-way easement to provide public access to the White Rock Coulee complex in southern Phillips County.
I'll second.
Thank you. A motion, a second. Discussion from the commission or questions?
I think this is a great project, and I'd like to thank the landowner and the department for working together to try to provide this access.
Further public comment, or excuse me, comment from the commission?
Yeah,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I just echo what Rich said, and just looking at the map, it looks like a great way to get access into a pretty large tract of land.
Okay. Do we have any comment in the region from the public? Don't see really anybody but staff. Okay. Comment here in Helena.
Again, I'm Nick Jivak. I'm the Conservation Director for the Montana Wildlife Federation. Commissioner Stuker's comments. This is a significant chunk of public land with some great wildlife values, so we wholeheartedly support this. Thank you.
Further comment here in Helena. Seeing none, back to the commission. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Our Helena Deer Plan.
Chairman, other members of the commission, and Director Williams. For the record, Quentin Kujal at the podium today, and it's and this next topic, the Helena Urban Deer Plan quota ranges, quota and quota EA extension, and also this is a proposal, so any adoption that comes out of commission action will go forward for public comment. When we talk about Helena urban deer, we have to use the word success. Some of you may remember the contention that came with this topic when the idea of taking deer in Helena in response to concerns of human safety, overabundance by one definition or another, damage to yards, intolerance, vehicle collisions, time staff responding, et cetera, et cetera. The city, to its credit, sat down and built a plan. The plan was not one of extirpation. The plan was a plan of reduction to more tolerable limits, to more tolerable densities. They've incorporated a surveillance program. They've worked with the area management biologist, Jenny Sika. They have done an exemplary job of taking the deer. We have never heard a comment about a situation in that specific application of that piece of the plan. The meat is donated to the local food bank. This year they have not conducted a take of deer for fiscal shortcomings, but they do look for those deer obviously to continue to reproduce. Take deer will be there in the future. And to that end, today's conversation is about requesting a quota range for the next 2 years. 0 to 250, and that would be for the 2020-2021 biennium and 2021-2022. And those those take periods run from the 15th of November to the 31st of March. Again, they've been doing a fantastic job. They carry that. The area management biologist works with them on study design to survey the deer population to see how they are relative to the community established density objective. Meat is donated. We haven't been doing CWD testing on these deer. We also haven't been seeing we haven't been receiving the magnitude of reports of sick deer that the community of Libby did, but undoubtedly that has changed. We've been in discussions about needing to bring CWD testing into this process. Again, with that history of success, and it is all success, we can't point to anything negative. We look to, again, propose that quota range for the next 2 bienniums. There'll be no deer take this year given the constraints of their fiscal capacity right now. And we also look to continue the programmatic EA, the deer plan itself, indefinitely until such time as their operating process changes significantly, so that we can continue this success in the communities dealing with these urban deer, balancing both those that want fewer and those that want more. With that, we'll stand for questions.
Thank you. We have a motion from the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Fish and Wildlife Commission adopt for public comment the 2020-2021 quota range for take of urban deer for the city of Helena and express the city of Helena's urban deer management plan as described by FWP.
Second.
Motion and second. Any questions or comments from the commission?
Glenn, is there any surveillance going on? Are they testing any of these deer?
Commissioner Aldrich, other members of the commission, and Director Williams, no, not in a concerted, focused, thoughtful sampling protocol sort of way. And again, that's the conversation that we're having, that and we can't see any way for that to move forward other than to change, to bring some element of thoughtful sampling.
When the city first came to the commission asking for this hunt, we rejected it, and there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth in the department over our decision, and our concern was of using in any measure department resources on animals that were not available to hunters, and that was an important policy consideration for us, but it didn't solve any problems. We had hoped that it would prompt, better analysis and consultation of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks when subdivisions were proposed and developed, taking into consideration urban wildlife. We also were concerned about how this was going to spread to other cities. So then after some more discussion and investigation by all of us, I spent one evening in my wife's Volvo driving all around Helena after dark, looking at deer and spotlighting, if you will. And it really changed my opinion because I saw a lot of deer that had been whacked and were in tough shape, and then just some unreasonable concentrations in areas, and so we corrected our mistake of not approving it, but there was a lot of comment. There were a lot of people here that really didn't want to see this process go forward, and some of it was heated with name calling and the whole bit. But I just want to emphasize that it has been a success. I think there has been more of a recognition by developers and others that we need to keep in mind what happens when we push out into spaces where there are wildlife and what that interaction is going to mean. We of course have that a lot in Billings with urban deer and urban mountain lions in some places. So I commend the city of Helena and the department for putting this together in a way that took all the controversy out of it, that allowed the commission to make a decision that they were comfortable using resources, even if it was just simple manpower, to assist the city of Helena. And I have no reason to believe this won't continue to be a good program. So with that, I'll open it up for public comment. Here in Helena, I don't see anybody in the regions. If there are people in the regions, just spout off. See any comment? Trout Unlimited doesn't have a position. Okay.
Question, Mr. Chairman. How many other cities do we have this in? I know we've approved some in the past, and I don't see a lot coming back in front of us, but I know like Roundup, Fort Benton, and some of those.
Yeah, that's a good. There's a fistful. Roundup, Coal Strip, Glendive, Fort Benton. Remember, the commission acted on white sulfur in December, so half a dozen. And then I would say that Helena is relatively unique within that group in the size of the community and the density of housing. It doesn't have a hunting option, a public hunting option. Some of those other communities taking advantages of open spaces within the community, edge of the community, edge of the housing, have been able to incorporate archers.
And I've been informed that I did miss a word here. Urban deer by the city of Helena and an indefinite extension of the city of Helena's urban deer management is how the should read.
And I
make a note that we did clarify that on the record, but go ahead, Quinn.
I just wanted to say this city staff, we have reached out to city staff again. They continue to be really open, and it was our understanding that they had intents to attend if they were able to. So not here.
Okay, just let me double check. Is there any public comment on the quota, the motion on the quota for Helena urban deer?
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask a question, please?
Yes, definitely.
Quentin, do you know, is there any level of frustration that in the community that the city did not, due to fiscal constraints, harvest any of those animals? Or, I mean, it doesn't sound like it's being done, but is there frustration because of that?
Commissioner Brower, other members of the commission, and Director Williams, we haven't heard that, and we might think that fits the circumstance where the take of deer has dropped in recent years, and we've seen the overall population, the density drop to near its target, and so we might expect for a short period of time all will be well in a relative sense, and so that folks not taking deer, given where the deer population is at right now, hasn't shown itself as a real issue this year. As deer continue to rise, which we would expect them to do, and if they continue not to be able to put a take effort on the ground, Commissioner Brower, we should probably expect that sentiment to show up more strongly, to be sure.
Thank you.
Well, I think the commission is probably unanimous in that if there's some testing to be done, it would make sense. It's especially with the way these animals are harvested and with carcass situations, some measure of sampling would certainly seem warranted.
To be sure, and even more broadly than just the Helena urban deer, those circumstances, Chair Colton, where there's a concentration of harvest and a proximity of staff to that harvest, or proximity of process to collect samples, given what we now understand about CWD in Montana, we've got to have that conversation and figure out how to make those adjustments. Point made, Chair Colton.
Appreciate that. Okay, seeing, unless there's any further comment, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor signify saying aye.
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 Carries. We're now at the point in our action items of public comments for items that were not on the agenda. So anything that was not on the agenda, please come forward.
Commissioners, I'll make this brief. Again, I'm Nick Jivak with the Montana Wildlife Federation, and I just had some very brief comments about chronic wasting disease. We really want to commend the department for taking the action. We now have, after this season, a really good sample size with more than 7,000 animals tested, 131 animals. Based on that, we're looking at a rough 1.8% prevalence rate, and I think this department deserves a lot of credit. Last year we had a rough estimate of about 2%, and that's played out. But it's interesting that I'm making these comments after talking about Helena's deer problem, because Libby was a real hot spot for this. And we would urge some type of aggressive action to lower the deer numbers there. I mean, get chased by deer in Helena with my dogs, but I tell you, when I was at EQC in late September, I've never seen a community with density of deer like Libby. And I'm sure that these discussions are taking place internally. But clearly with chronic wasting disease, geographic distribution was Ruby Valley, I think, surprised a lot of us who know that country. There's a very high density of deer down there, very productive landscape, and also a lot of really generous landowners who do allow access. So the other one that seemed to shock us, that one deer like 50 miles north of Miles City. So it appears, and obviously I'm not a wildlife scientist, that it's very geographically distributed, but a low prevalence still. So we just, we hope those conversations continue. The worst scenario would be if hunters quit participating, of course. So we're here as a partner, and we just want to commend you for your actions. And I hope we continue to have these discussions about how we manage this, because it's clearly everywhere. And that's the new reality. So thank you.
Thank you. Further comment on items that were not on the agenda?
Quick, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Director Williams, I just wanted to stand up and quickly say I had an opportunity to participate in the Fisheries Division conference in December, and I just wanted to thank and recognize Eileen and Eric for their outstanding work to engage partners, and it was a really great day to get to spend with the Fisheries Division, so thank you to them. And I just wanted to recognize, I know that's going to be a tumultuous couple of months ahead for them, so I wanted to say thank you to them in advance.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Further comment here on items not on the agenda, any discussion? Out in the regions, do we have anybody that wanted to address any issues that we didn't talk about in our action items? I appreciate Nick's comments and you know, had that conversation with Nick the other day, and I've had it with others about Libby, and I know that the region's engaged and hopefully take place there. I think chronic wasting disease is going to flop into our work session discussion to some extent as well. Just as a betting man, I'd bet on that. Tim, do you have? I think you were going to comment on something.
Look like I want to say something. You know, I think if you look at the tentatives, you know, we trail of a pretty aggressive plan, you know, in the Libby area to continue to harvest. Having spent some time with Neil Williams and that crew up there, all over it. They really are. I mean, they've really been dumbstruck with Libby and Nenamoose not too far away, and a lot. So had discussions and talking about, you know, what Clinton just got involved with, and that is
Yeah, thank you for those assessments. Any other comments from the commission? Go to the order. My thoughts are, given that we need staff to come in and the way we have our work session scheduled, we have Shauna check and make sure that we can have lunch at 11:30, have a brief lunch from 11:30 to 11:45, and then kick off our work session. That square with everybody? Maybe just make sure our lunch delivery people sometimes have different time managed. All right. Well, we'll count on that. So we'll be. Let's go ahead and formally adjourn. If I could get a motion.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second.
second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And assuming that lunch is on time around 11:30, we'll be getting kicked off about 11:45.